Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, my name is Sam Barsky. Probably the first thing you noticed as you took your seat here was what's scattered along all these tables here, and I'm sure that's the reason why you're here. So anyway, there's a story behind it, and I just love sharing the story with other people. So, when I was a child, art was not my main interest. I wasn't into knitting. I learned how to sew as a child, but not how to knit. I thought I would go into a career in the natural sciences somewhere. I had all these different ideas of possible careers, but none of them panned out when I got to college. And then what actually happened when I did get to college is I ended up studying nursing. I took all the prerequisites for nursing. I went through part of the nursing program, but I had trouble because I had some medical issues. It was hard to stand in one place for a long time and to lift so much weight all the time. So I ended up having to drop out of nursing school, which left me with a dilemma. What do I do with my life now? Well, for the past several years before that, I always took notice of people knitting or crocheting when I saw that. And I didn't even know the difference between knit and crochet. Anytime there was a semester break, when I didn't have any studies to do, I tried somehow to pick up on it. There was a chain in the past called Woolworth, which sounds like the name of a yarn shop, but it was not. It was a discount store, but they did sell yarn and needles. There was one in my neighborhood, and I went over there and I bought yarn in a few colors, and I saw they sold either sets of 2 long sticks or 1 short stick, and I thought maybe the short stick was simpler, not knowing what each of them were for. And I took books out of the local library, not this library, the library in Baltimore, about knit and crochet, and I tried to teach myself from the 2-dimensional diagrams, and I couldn't figure it out from that. After that, I tried signing up for courses to knit and or crochet whenever I saw one offered somewhere. What would happen each time was the course would get canceled because of low enrollment. Usually that low enrollment was just me. But despite my frustrations with that, I had something else going on in my life, which was that I was studying to be a nurse, and I was working really hard on that, and I put it aside for that. But anyway, in 1999, things weren't going well for me with the nursing program, and I ended up dropping out mid-semester. At that point, I was left with a dilemma. What do I do with my life now? I looked at the continuing education catalog that the college I was going to offered, and I thought maybe I would take a short course in a few weeks that would lead to a job that would pay a decent enough income that I could pay my bills and make my way. But nothing in that catalog appealed to me. I did find various jobs here and there in the meantime, but my dream of learning to knit never left me. It was a few weeks after dropping out when I went to a flea market that I used to go to every Sunday morning, and I knew pretty much most of the vendors and customers very well. I would see them there every Sunday. It was a social experience. But one Sunday, there was a new table there that had these 3 ladies who I had never seen before, and they were selling yarn, and they were knitting. I asked them, where can I go to learn how to do that? And they said, we have a shop, come to our shop, and we can teach you for free under one condition, which is that you buy our yarn. I said, okay. A few days later, I came to the shop. I purposely wore a commercially made paisley patterned sweater I owned at the time to show them what I wanted to accomplish. The lady who was giving me my lesson, a very nice, sweet lady, who sadly is no longer with us, she told me That's for experienced knitters only. Today I'm just going to teach you how to do a basic solid colored scarf. And I wasn't interested in a scarf as much as I was a sweater. I was disappointed, but I took any instruction I could, and on that very day, I walked out of the place knowing how to knit. Knowing how to knit just the knit stitch, and just to do a scarf. But I was determined to advance from that position. So there was a lady who I met in the shop, a customer, and she and I exchanged phone numbers. And then when she called me sometime later, she told me secretly, there is another yarn shop in town. It's much closer to where you live. Why don't you go to that place? So I went to, this is yarn shop number 2. I walked in there. The lady who owned that shop took an instant liking to me. I told her my goal of wanting to make a sweater, and she said, you're going to walk out of here today having already started a sweater. So I didn't know how to do the purl stitch then, which is the reverse stitch for those who don't know knitting. I only knew how to do the knit stitch, and you have to know how to do both kinds of stitches to do ribbing like you see at the bottom of most sweaters. So she took a knitting machine she had me pick out a yarn which was a teal colored yarn, and she made the ribbing out of that, and she said just do the knit stitch row after row, make a rectangle out of it, and that will become one side of your sweater. During that time, since I didn't know how to knit, only to purl, what I ended up with was a bumpy sweater, not a flat one like this, but one that looked very bumpy. It took me about 8 months to make it. I learned more skills along the way, and just in time for the turn of the century, I finished my first sweater. And since I learned more skills by then, including purling, early in the year 2000, I made another sweater that I did both kinds of stitches on. I made a smooth surface like this. It took me just 2 months by now since I knew a lot more, and I had 2 solid color sweaters. But I didn't want to spend my whole life just making solid color sweaters like these. That's not a life of knitting. So I wanted to do something a little more interesting. Around that time, I discovered in the subscription card to Vogue Knitting magazine, there was a picture of a sweater that looked like a globe. It was called Map of the World. I told the lady who owned shop number 2, this is what I want to do next. And she told me a very familiar line. She said, that's for experienced knitters only. I was not willing to take no for an answer. So I called up Vogue Knitting magazine. I said, is there any way I can obtain the pattern for this? They told me, sure. They gave me all the info about it. I acquired a copy of the pattern. I was really determined. I learned how to change colors as I was doing this. I didn't use the same colors that the pattern called for, and it took me 5 months, but here it is. Here you can take all the pictures you want.
Can you turn it this way, please?
Now that I finished this sweater, I looked through all the patterns that the store had to offer to try to figure out what to do next. I was left with another dilemma now. All the other patterns that were in that store didn't look so interesting to me after having accomplished that. At that point, I was thinking maybe I would design something of my own. Around that time, I was driving on the Baltimore Beltway, and I was looking at the cloudy sky. I was transporting a lady at that time, and who also happened to be a knitter, and she and I were talking about knitting, and we were looking at the beautiful cloudy sky together, and we were both discussing the idea of a cloudy sky sweater. After that, I was thinking, what are some other elements of nature? What about a body of water, or some trees, or whatever, mountains? I started to draw a picture on some piece of paper of some nature scene, but then as I was doing that, I thought, why do I need this, a graph or anything? I can just freehand this as I go along. I will give it a try. So with some scraps of yarn I had, I started at the bottom over here. I decided to use this brown and gray yarn that I had to look like rock, and blue and white to look like water, and this is the waterfall I came up with. Freehand, no pattern. As I was getting around, I was thinking what leads into a waterfall, and that's why I thought of the raging river, and then I got the idea, why not add to that a water wheel and a covered bridge. This is the front of it, and of course it's topped with the cloudy sky. After this was done, I didn't think it looked really good as a piece of art, but it was something. It was something to improve upon. After that, I got the idea I could make another sweater with more elements of nature. And that's when I came up with this one. And then when I was in the middle of this one, where I got the idea to put ducks in it while I was in the middle of doing this water here, I realized this is what I want to do. After I was struggling to figure out what do I want to do with my life now, it was this. I hadn't found a way to monetize it, but I realized this is what I want to do with my life. After I finished that duck sweater that I just showed you, I saw a picture in a magazine of the Tower Bridge in London. I thought, I don't only have to do nature, I could do buildings and landmarks too. So I started to knit a picture of the Tower Bridge onto a sweater. I ran into some trouble doing it. I abandoned that project for now, for the moment. I got frustrated with it, so frustrated that I was wondering if I would continue to do this. But in the meantime, I thought I'll start another project. It was also coming toward a period of time in which the weather is warmer, and I thought if I want to wear these all year long, I can't make them long sleeved out of wool, or else I'll be too hot to wear them in the summer. I knew that women wear short-sleeved, commercially made sweaters, that's a thing, but I never saw such a thing for men. But I thought, can I do that? Can I make a short-sleeved sweater out of cotton? Would it be acceptable for a man to wear that? Well, I got to work on it with some scraps of yarn I had once again, and I decided somehow to put a castle on it, a castle on an island. It took me a few months, I got it done, and I was so scared to wear it in public the first day, as a man to wear a short-sleeved sweater, that I wore it when I took a bus trip to New York. I thought, no one here will know me. And as I was walking around the streets of Manhattan, I had lots of people come up to me and give me compliments for it. And I thought, this isn't too bad after all. Then, after that, the weirdest, eeriest thing in my life of knitting happened. As the bus was leaving New York, the date was May 2001, and I was looking at the New York skyline, and I was looking at the tallest buildings, which happened to be the Empire State Building and the Twin Towers. And I was thinking I could do a Twin Towers sweater, and I had the yarn with me. I started it during the bus ride. It took me about a month, and I got done a Twin Towers sweater. Not imagining what would happen to the Twin Towers just a few months later. After that, it was still the summer of 2001, and I tried again with a London Tower Bridge sweater, and I made it, and I was so happy with the results this time that a year later I made another one, colored a little differently. Also in the summer of 2001, I went to an Orioles game, and as I was getting ready to go to the game, I felt really distraught about it. I didn't have a sweater for wearing to Orioles games. After that, I committed myself to making a sweater for the Orioles by the next season. A sweater of specifically their stadium, Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I bought the yarn in the summer of 2001. I waited until the next year to start on it. I started in March of 2002, got to work on it. The front of it went very well. Then I got around to the back, and then I ran out of this green yarn that I was using to represent the field. I didn't know what it was anymore. None of the stores I knew carried it anymore. But fortunately, I still had a label. So I Googled yarn shops in Maryland, and I got a long list of them. I started calling them up in geographical order and asked, "Do you have this yarn?" All of them answered no, until I got to one in the city of Bethesda, which is just outside of DC. I said, "Please put two skeins on hold. I'll be over in an hour." I jumped in my car and drove an hour all the way to the suburbs of DC just to get a skein of yarn to finish this sweater. It's not exactly the same because there is something called a dye lot, which varies in each production of yarn. So you can see it's a little different here and here, but it's a sign of what happened. In the year 2002, I made lots of sweaters. But at the end of 2002, something happened. I met this lady over here. So 2003, I was busy getting ready for a wedding. I didn't have much time to knit then, and I only made 2 sweaters. But on the way home from our honeymoon, which happened to be to Niagara Falls, I bought the yarn to make a Niagara Falls sweater. I subsequently made a second Niagara Falls sweater years later.
Some of us wish you would turn left so we could see. Thank you. Thank you.
The following year, in the first year we were married, we went with our parents to the American Visionary Arts Museum in Baltimore. While we were at the museum, I was wearing the other Tower Bridge sweater I have, and the lady who owned the museum at that time, we walked by her office and she was looking at what I was wearing. So she came out of her office to inquire, and I told her what it was. On the spot, she decided that for an upcoming exhibit that would last a year, she would have 2 of my sweaters in the museum on display. It became my first public recognition as an artist. So here's one of them that was on display, dolphins. And since it was a water-themed event of water creatures and stuff like that, sharks. One of the things my wife and I like to do a lot is travel. And it just happened that it seemed natural without thinking about it. If we traveled somewhere in which I had a sweater to wear that sweater in that location, but I wasn't purposely trying to make a collection of pictures like that or anything. It's like when we went to Venice, I wore my Venice sweater there. But after a while, I discovered I had about 10 to 15 pictures wearing sweaters in those locations. And one day I discovered, wow, this is a form of art of its own. So I made an effort after that, purposely, to get pictures wearing all my sweaters in the respective locations. And not just that, make sweaters for upcoming planned travel. So when we went to Stonehenge one year, I made a Stonehenge sweater. And that became the start of a new trend of what I was doing. Now, this is something I don't show or talk about at most events, but tonight I'm going to share something very unusual with you. Last night we went to a wedding. So one of the things I made for going to weddings, I made this for a wedding in her family, and then I subsequently have worn it to a lot of other weddings, a tuxedo sweater. And I have it with me just because I brought it along to wear to the wedding we went to last night. But to get back to this, the year 2016 started, and I had 91 lifetime sweaters. I had done 9 the year before. I thought if I can match that, do 9 in the year 2016, I can get to my 100th lifetime sweater before the end of the year. I realized since 100 is such a milestone, I have to do something a little more interesting. So I was asking around for ideas. What can be my 100th sweater? Lots of people were giving me crazy ideas. I don't remember if this was my idea or someone else's, but I ended up making, for my 100th sweater, it has miniatures of many of the other sweaters I made previously. When the year 2017 came at the beginning of the year, it was the first Sunday of the year. I woke up in the morning, I looked at my phone, like so many people do when they first wake up, and I noticed I had a ton of Facebook messages, friend requests. I had so many of them, and I thought I had been hacked. But then I started looking at the messages, and they said, do you know you're in an article in this and that? I got requests from the media for interviews. It's like, what's going on here? And apparently what happened was the Friday before, I accidentally sent a friend request to someone I didn't know who looked at my profile and saw the sweaters, and he decided to write his own article about that. So he used a site called Imgur that I had never heard of before and wrote an article about my knitting. And the Imgur article apparently went viral overnight when I was asleep. And then the next day, the mass media picked up on it. So the year 2017 started a new phase of my life, which became all about interviews and travel to different places, to give speeches like this one. I knew that sooner or later I would end up in Hollywood, so I thought I better do a sweater in the Hollywood. And sure enough, that happened. And when we went to so I could take a picture in front of the Hollywood sign, I parked in one spot. There was a tour bus that parked in the spot next to me. A whole bunch of people got out of the tour bus, and some of them walked up to me and said, "Are you the one who knits the sweaters and poses in front of the landmarks?" And I said, "Indeed I am." And I said, "I'm about to do just that. I'm about to take a picture wearing this sweater in front of the Hollywood sign." So a big group of tourists ended up getting in the picture with me. Similar things have happened on other occasions too. While I was sitting at the airport waiting to fly home from LA on that trip, I was looking at my email, and I had gotten an email from the Boulder Library in Colorado. They asked me if I could be part of a project that would happen 1 year later. They wanted me to put 40 of my sweaters on display at the Boulder Library for a period of 2 months. And they wanted me to do something very unusual, which was to knit 3 sweaters of Boulder area landmarks. And the purpose of that would be that people would borrow the sweaters from the library like you borrow books. Then they would take them to the respective landmark, try it on, take their own selfie wearing it in front of that landmark, and then return it to the library. So this is one of my Boulder sweaters. These mountains here are called the Flatirons. It's one of the signature parts of the skyline of Boulder. In 2019, I started yet something else. This is the first time I did something really commercial with my sweaters. So 2 years earlier, a startup company in Las Vegas had found me. They turn anything you want, any piece of art, into a t-shirt, mostly focused on children's drawings. But they were fans of mine online, and they asked me, would you like to partner with us? We'll turn your sweaters into t-shirts and sell them. So it took 2 years to get it set up. I started with them in 2019, and as you see, some of these t-shirts look like some of the familiar sweaters you see around here. To this date, they've actually made 34 of my sweaters into t-shirts. Some of you here are wearing them this evening. All was going well until the year 2020. I had a lot of more stuff planned, more trips, more workshops, more talks and everything. And then we all know what happened that year. So here we all are stuck at home. And since I wasn't traveling, my wife and I were taking nature walks in all different local parks every day. One of those parks where we took a walk, where we had been a few times before, is called Jerusalem Mill. It's in the northeastern suburbs of Baltimore. It's kind of a little off of US 1. And I was posting pictures of our nature walks on Facebook, including the Jerusalem Mill one with the building, and I got some suggestions. Why don't you make a sweater out of that? Normally I focus on well-known landmarks that are famous all over the world, but since we were stuck at home for this foreseeable future, I thought, why not? I'll do some local landmarks. So this is Jerusalem Mill over here. I ended up making quite a number of sweaters of other local landmarks, obscure ones that people outside the Baltimore area are not familiar with. When things opened up again, I did places a little further away, like I did Rehoboth Beach, Toronto. One of the most recent ones I completed, which was the hardest sweater I ever made, is the Brooklyn Bridge. It was hard because I've done lots of sweaters with skylines, with buildings. I've done lots of sweaters with bridges that have cables like that. But to overlay the cables with the buildings, that was very hard. I actually had to take it apart and redo it a couple of times. but it's done now. The most recent sweater I finished is over there. It's the Peabody Library in Baltimore. I wore it when I did a similar event to this one a few weeks ago in Baltimore at a library, not the Peabody Library, but I thought it was perfect to wear there. So I'm going to invite you to ask questions. You can ask me questions about whatever you want about my knitting life.
What kind of yarn are you using? What's your favorite brand?
I use all different yarns, all different brands of yarn. I use mostly cotton now because I get hot easily. I like these short sleeve cotton sweaters that I wear. They're for the summer, but I like to wear them all year long. They're very comfortable.
Do you weave in your ends as you go or at the end?
I do a mixture. So the process of weaving in the ends, I invented my own word for it, which is nitpicking, spelled with a K before it. And the reason why I call it that is because who enjoys doing it? I feel like it's a logical word for that.
So in your first sweater, that was a pictorial scene, you didn't use a drawing or a photograph freehand. Do you freehand without reference your landmark ones as well?
Yeah, so I freehand everything. I do look at pictures, usually on the internet, of the landmarks I'm going to do, just to know all the details of it in exact detail, but I don't make a graph or chart or anything like that.
I'm curious about the Boulder checkout sweaters. How long do they keep the sweaters? What kind of shape were they when they got back to you?
So it was a 2-month program because they rotate different artists every 2 months, and that was my turn for 2 months. And afterwards, I got back all my sweaters, except for one I made of the library building itself, which I made an agreement that they could keep it.
What about the ones that people checked out that go around to the landmarks?
I made them out of a very durable yarn, and it's still in good condition. I wear it sometimes.
Okay.
How many sweaters will you have at the Renwick Gallery in Washington, D.C.?
Just one, just this one here. But I have another exhibit coming up in a few months. It's going to be at an art museum in Milwaukee, in which I'm going to have 25 sweaters in that.
Do you do custom sweaters, and do any celebrities have your sweaters?
So I don't make custom sweat. People ask me that all the time, and because it takes me so long to make one, it's not practical for me to be a human sweater mill. I can't do that for others, but I offer the t-shirts as a compromise because they can be mass-produced. It's very hard for the company that makes them to make a template for one t-shirt, which is why there's only 34 of them out now. But once it's out, they can print as many as they want to, and a few celebrities have bought my t-shirts. As far, maybe more, a few I know of.
You make some really beautiful color choices in your sweaters. And then you go from, what's in your stash? Is that where you start? Or do you think about colors in your clothes?
Like sometimes I use yarn already in my stash. Sometimes I have to buy yarn for something. Sometimes I see yarn for sale and I think this would be good for a future sweater and I don't know what, and then I use it for something at a later date.
How many sweaters are you looking at?
168.
Approximately how many hours would you say it takes to knit one sweater?
It varies. No two sweaters are alike because some are easier and some are harder. Sometimes I do, but usually I knit with groups of other people who knit. I go to knitting groups almost every day and do this with other people.
Have you opened up to the idea of knitting scarves again?
So I occasionally have made scarves as gifts for other people, but I almost do exclusively sweaters. I also make hats for hospitals.
What sweater took you the longest to?
So actually, the one you see in front of you with those playing cards, that took me the longest because I put it on the back burner for 10 years before I refilled it.
What is the ratio of men who like to knit to women who like to knit?
I'm actually don't know that, but I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that, but what I do know is the knitting groups I go to are almost exclusively women besides me. I've tried to get men interested in them too, but most of the men who I've tried to convince to join have not. Yes, exactly. I started, it was just an idea. When we first got married, she wanted to have something also, and it was an idea I came up with, but it's not really her style. She likes these store-bought dresses better.
What are you working on right now?
So I have a few works in progress. I have an airplane sweater that I'm making for whenever I fly. I think it would be neat to wear an airplane sweater. I have a sweater of Fort McHenry in Baltimore in the works, and I'm going to do some sweaters of Milwaukee area landmarks for this upcoming event I'm doing in Milwaukee.
Do you ever do people portrait sweaters?
Now, I'm not much into portraits as I am into inanimate objects, but it's very hard to do. It's not my thing, and whenever I've had occasionally to do a human in one of them, it's very hard because of the amount of detail in it. Yeah, so I get asked that a lot. I don't have a number one favorite. It's just very hard for me to determine that.
Generally, how many projects are you working on at once?
It varies. Sometimes 1, 2, or 3. It varies.
That was my question.
Do you do all your sweaters flat and stitch them together, or do you do some circular knitting too?
Yeah, so what I do is I make a rectangle for the front and back, and then the sleeves are separate parts, and then I fuse them together, the front and back here, do the neckline, and then attach the sleeves, and then sew it up like that.
When was the last time you purchased a sweater?
Decades ago. In plastic boxes, and in bags in those boxes.
Is there a story behind the Philly sweater you're wearing right now?
So, a little before COVID came, I had actually was supposed to do an event in Philadelphia, so that's what I made it for. And then I just finished it. Then the event got canceled, of course, and just around the time COVID had started, we came up to Philadelphia so I could get pictures in front of these landmarks. And the picture I took of the Liberty Bell, since the museum that the bell is in it was closed, the only picture I could get back then was in front of the window outside. But today we actually went earlier today to the Liberty Bell, and I got a picture inside the museum.
Do you ever crochet?
I've tried. I'm not as good at it. I could get good if I practice, but I do so much knitting, I don't have a lot of time to practice crochet.
Do you ever teach people to knit?
Yes, I teach classes on this every once in a while, whenever someone offers me a gig like this.
Do you usually gather all the yarn you're going to use for a sweater at once, like find colors, or do you often use part of it and then go buy more, or find something that's in your stash and kind of build on it?
Sometimes I have to buy some of the yarn for after I've started. I look for what's a good yarn for this.
With how much knitting you do you have to do hand stretches before or after or during? Because that's the problem that I have. My hands cramped.
I take breaks when it bothers me, but I don't have really the muscles get most of the work are like here.
Continental or English?
English. I'm a thrower.
Do you still work outside of doing knitting projects?
All the work I do now is somehow related to knitting.
What is your hour commitment
It varies, but I go to a whole bunch of knitting groups, and that's most of my commitment.
I just want to say that when you started out, you were saying that you didn't know what to do next in life, and that you finally figured out that it was knitting. And I think that's so incredible, because people go through their whole lives and never find that thing. And I'm just so happy that you found that.
Thank you.
Do you wear one of your sweaters every day?
Yes, I don't own anything else for my wardrobe.
Do you ever do any painting or drawing outside of that?
Not too much.
How do you decide whether to keep the sweater long or short sleeve?
A lot of the time it depends on the time of year I'm going to wear it, or like what yarns would look good for it.
You have sweaters for when you do certain things or when you visit certain places, but do you have a knitting sweater, like a sweater you knit in?
People have suggested to me to make that. I'm not ruling out ever doing it.
Have you ever started working on a sweater and actually stopped, like not just backburned it?
Yes, there are some that haven't worked out the way I've wanted. Like, for example, I started one of a DC metro station. I had trouble doing it. I gave up on it. I might do it again someday, but that particular one, I just gave up on it.
Do you have any other creative practice besides knitting?
Every once in a while, I get into something, but it's mainly knitting.
How do you continue to challenge yourself with some things you choose?
Like, everything is a challenge. Everything has new problems I have to solve. It's like each of these is individual. Many of them have uncharted territory I have to figure out.
Can you tell us about that one there in the middle with the green?
So that's a tiger sweater. I was inspired to do it because I saw a show on the Discovery Channel one time about tigers. I thought, I can do a tiger sweater. That would be neat. And I realized I could make tigers just by taking an orange and a black yarn and twisting them together, and it wouldn't look like perfect stripes, but you would know they were tigers. This is intarsia. It's intarsia without a pattern.
Did you ever think of taking any of your designs and selling it or letting someone mass produce it?
Yes, I want to eventually have a company mass produce my sweaters as sweaters, not t-shirts, but I'm waiting until I can find a reliable company to do that.
So not Timo. Well, we have a chance to look at some of the sweaters that you have behind the stage too, like in addition to the ones that are spread out.
Sure, these were the ones I just was talking about in my speech, and what I'm going to do is, one of the things I do afterwards is everyone can get in a group picture, and normally I let each person hold one, but I'm going to have people share which ones they hold for the group picture, and then you can hold it in front of you for that picture.
Thank you.
Including these. The only one that's off limits is this one because it's going into the Smithsonian.